Alright, hi guys. So what we're going to do today is if we've ended the war in an armistice, what I want to do today is start talking then about how do we actually make peace. What are some of the conflicting issues? What are the problems? Why is it not just so simple as, this nation, surrenders, loses the war, moves on? Why this is so critical, so important, is a man who, we've explored his career a little bit in World War One. It ended rather ignominiously, but Winston Churchill, okay, author of the Gallipoli Campaign. Churchill will later become Prime Minister during the Second World War of Great Britain. And Churchill would often say that the best way to understand the world wars, and he said it plurally, was if you look at it not as one war in 1914 to 1918 and then another 1939 to 45, but instead look at it as the same war. Look at it as one war that's got an armistice in between. And the fact is, that's kind of the narrative that I'm going to be pushing today. The fact is, if we look at the First World War, if we look especially at the Treaty of Versailles, the peace that follows, there was no way that this was going to be a lasting peace. There was no way that this was going to fix any of the issues, do anything of import. This was doomed to fail. And what makes this absolutely criminal is the fact that I think that they knew. At the time, if you look at some of the writings, some of the sayings, they knew that this was not going to be effective. And so the legacy then of the Great War, and this is, one of the things we'll be delving into next week, is this is going to set up the Second World War. There's just simply no way around it. Well, one of the contributing factors to the war, as we begin looking, at the death toll, the millions who were killed, some 10, 12 million people murdered by the war, is that's not even the full extent of human suffering. Because World War I is bequeathed to something else, and that is, this is a small world. What do I mean by that? Think about it. Britain cannot feed itself. That means you've got ships coming from Africa going to Europe. You've got men and material coming from the United States going to Europe. The ships that bring that stuff there then have to go back. This is a world war, so you've got stuff now going on in Asia. And what we're going to see is in 1918, the birth of Spanish flu. Now, this is a truly pandemic of epic proportions. Try to remember, if you will, a few years ago, there was the whole Ebola outbreak, and I remember it well. Every time a student would, get sick, they'd add, well, at least it's not Ebola, and I can't judge because I did do the same. But how many people in the United States died from that outbreak? You remember? Well, the answer is, I think, one person. Number of people were infected, they were able to treat it, but only one person actually died. And yet there for a while, for a few weeks, people were legitimately gripped by fear. But the influenza pandemic of 1918 is really going to be absolutely catastrophic. What do I mean by catastrophic? Well, 50 million people. Okay, to put that in American perspective, just to make this a bit more understanding, 1/4 of all of the people in the United States will be infected with this virus. 675,000 Americans are going to die. And the fact is, those percentages are about equal for everyone in Europe as well. In fact, worldwide. 50 million people. This thing is going to kill 5 times as many as the First World War. But you don't get a break. It's just literally one right after the other. And so why then, I want to mention this, is what we're going to be doing in the wake of the First World War is creating a culture of fear. The fact is, people are now afraid of World War I. They're afraid of the changes it bequeathed. They're afraid of the loss of the old order, the loss of status, the collapse of Germany, the dissolution of the dual monarchy in Austria-Hungary. And this is now a world, this is not a war, and I can't state this enough, this is not a war that solves things. This is not a war that you can simply say, like World War II, well, the Nazis are defeated, we're done. Instead, this is a war that just abruptly comes to a halt, much as it did in our 1918 lecture, And then people are left wondering, what do we then do? So why do we call this the Spanish flu? If it's actually, I think it's H1N1. Well, wartime censorship. This is another lasting legacy of the First World War. The fact is, as you can see from this map, it spread in Europe and Africa, the United States, Canada, but wartime censorship. Okay, Africa, that's under the dominion of the war powers, where that outbreak is. Okay, France isn't going to report on it. Belgium's not going to report on it. Britain, Germany's not going to report on it. The United States, we don't want to scare people. But in Spain, where the king falls victim to the flu, he doesn't die, but he gets incredibly sick, there's no wartime censorship. There's nobody worried or wondering, hey, can we not report on this? So the newspapers ate it up. This was the one thing that they could report on this. And so when, you're an average common person, when you're reading this stuff, and you see that, wait a minute, we keep mentioning Spain a lot, it creates the impression in the mind that this is heavily hitting Spain. Hence, Spanish influenza. The fact is, Spain was no harder hit. In fact, other places were harder hit, but because they could only report in Spain, that's why the world got this idea that that is where it was targeted. And what we're going to see, these are more American-based. I took these from my American history courses, but just going to give you a sense. This is how it would have been worldwide. Hospitals just overflowing. People not entirely sure what's causing it, so they would have things like this, don't spit. Spanish influenza endangering the prosecution of the war in Europe. Okay, 1,500 cases here in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. 30 deaths already resulting. The fact is, this scared the hell out of people. So much so that they would have to put adverts in the newspaper. Don't kiss your sweetheart while Spanish flu or pneumonia plague is on. You might kill her or him by passing a deadly germ along. Of course, that's part I'm thinking, I don't really need money for a divorce lawyer anymore. This could be a good thing. I'm sorry, I'm a horrible human being. I'm just, somebody thought it. This is what I also love this. You ever have grandparents or old people, blah, 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 kids these days, damn millennials, turn the music down, that kind of crap. This is from 1918. Don't sneeze or cough in anybody's face. They literally had to tell people that. Don't give me that crap that old people are smarter than us. You literally had to put in print not to cough in somebody's face. I don't think anybody listened, but, there's the hope. Medical authorities fear will attack 40% of people. This scared the hell out of people. They even ran adverts like this, literally, how to use the handkerchief. People were, and you want to think, well, are they overblowing it? The fact is, no. These are from all of the, major cities in the world affected. And if you look, New York's probably the hardest hit. And then it's going to be London, and then Paris, and then Berlin. But literally, this grips the world. 50 million people dead. And so it's now in that avalanche of fear, coupled with the avalanche of, maybe not avalanche, but that just feeling. Is the First World War going to actually end at, some point? Will this war finally stop? That people start to say, okay, it's in this culture of fear, we have to make a peace. How can we make it where we get what we want? We feel like our brothers and husbands and fathers and sons didn't die in vain, but yet end the war. Remember, let's go back a little bit. The armistice, okay? The Russians are out of the war. The Germans are out of the war. The Central Powers collapse. But the Germans don't believe that they believe they're ending the war. They don't believe that they've lost the war. They believe this is a mutually guaranteed, hey, we're all going to agree to end this thing. And so nobody knows exactly, how do you end this? How do you make it where fighting doesn't just resume? I think I made the comment about armistices. Armistices, that's kind of fun to say, plural. But the Korean conflict, how that's an armistice, and one of the things that we see is that Every few years, people shell Yapyong Island. I mean, these two nations are sparring. That's why, the new North Korean ballistic missile launch, people are scared. It's a technical state of war. How do you end this? And the Allies are going to capitalize on the fact Germany is under throes of revolution. Germany needs to focus its army inward. Germany doesn't have the time, inclination, or the ability to argue with us. The Hochseeflotte has literally been interned by the Royal Navy. So they don't have an effective army. They're on the brink of revolution. Their navy is in Scapa Flow. Now take those three things, making German, resistance to the treaty a moot point. Now to that add the fact that Britain, France, Italy have suffered so many hundreds of thousands and millions killed. They're out for blood. The fact is, one of the reasons, remember, we couldn't stop this war in 15, stop it in 16, in 17, early 18, is so many people had died, you have to give that meaning. And that's going to be one of the themes that we talk about in our final lectures coming up. Giving that concept meaning, you're not likely going to just say, okay, let's just end the war. Let's just stop. And so they want, the Allies are out for blood. Germany is incapable of resisting. And so what that means is the treaty that comes out of the First World War is going to be harsh. It is going to be brutal. It's going to make Brest-Litovsk look like a cakewalk. And I cannot understate this enough. The significance of the Versailles Treaty is not that it ended the First World War. The significance of the Versailles Treaty is that it leads to the Second World War. The significance is it all but makes another confrontation with Germany impossible. And the reason by that, it's going to create a massive power vacuum, which we'll talk about in just a second. So if we look then at the Versailles Treaty, understand this. The Germans had, these are the peacemakers, okay? So we've got David Lloyd George on the right. We've got American President Woodrow Wilson in the center. And then we've got French President Poincaré on the left. These are the peacemakers. And what we're going to see is, the Germans had agreed to an armistice based on the condition of the 14 points. The Austro-Hungarians had agreed to an armistice based on the condition of the 14 points. But the Allies don't care about that now. There's some stuff that they like, sure. But right now, they want a tough peace. They want Germany to pay. They want to bring Germany to its knees and make it suffer for what it has done. And so I made the comment, I believe it was last lecture, the thinking behind the Treaty of Versailles, or behind the 14 points, was this. If you get in a fight with somebody and he kicks your ass, you're going to want revenge. But if you get in a fight with somebody and you can amicably resolve it, or say, hey, it doesn't matter, hey, we both did good, participation trophies all around, maybe you're not going to want another go. But what happens here is, somebody in Germany is going to be out for blood. We're going to see, of the various hundreds of articles of the treaty, I don't want you to know all of them, but a few that I want to point out. Article 231. And what Article 231, this is the war guilt clause. And so even though Austria-Hungary starts the war by declaring war on Serbia back on July 28, 1914, what seems like years ago, or at least 16 weeks ago, they start the war. Now, the Allies say, well, Germany, you had the carte blanche, you backed Austria. Not to mention, Austria is literally at this point, this is now 1919, we'll talk about in a second, the dual monarchy has collapsed. Austria-Hungary no longer exists. Well, that means they can't pay the indemnities. That means they cannot pay for all the damage. And the fact is, much as we did in this course, people realize the war on the Serbian front is not the First World War. Even the war on the Eastern front, to some extent. When I say World War I, most people are going to instantly think biplanes, tanks, trenches. Well, that's the Western Front, so it's got to be against Germany. So the War Guilt Clause, Article 231, states that Germany must agree that it started the war. that it wanted to do this, that this was something that it wanted to do, and as such, it would be held solely responsible. Would Austria be burdened? Absolutely. Is Austria going to be hard hit? Yeah, but nowhere to the extent of Germany. Now, the Treaty of Versailles is also going to do things like establish the League of Nations. So even though it's heavy-handed on the one hand, on the other, it's saying, let's try to prevent a future war. But all of this is done just so... What's the word? By the way, I apologize. I think I'm getting sick. That's why my voice is a little off. It's all done so chaotically and haphazardly that there's no unified thing. On the one hand, it wants to beat the hell out of Germany. On the other, it's fairly generous and magnanimous. And there's not really a sense, you could say, where this makes sense, this doesn't. You know, there's not really a way you can say this is what they were trying to achieve. At the time, I don't even think they knew what they were trying to achieve. And one of the best ways we can see that comes to Woodrow Wilson. Remember, Woodrow Wilson is this idealist. Woodrow Wilson had campaigned self-determination for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In fact, it's the United States, believe it or not, that says, you know what, autonomy within the Austro-Hungarian Empire is not good enough. Czechoslovakia should be free. Poland should be free. The Serbs should be free. The Croats should be free. Break it up. Tear it down. Well, there was a delegate to... There's a delegate to the Versailles Treaty, to the Versailles Paris Peace Conference at Versailles. And he really liked this idea. And he approached Woodrow Wilson and he said, we want that too. Anybody have any idea who this is? I have no idea why I did not put the next image here of him actually at Versailles. If you don't know who this is, I'm going to say a few words and see if this triggers something in American history. Ya Drang, Hue, Tet, Saigon. This is Ho Chi Minh, who is a member of the Indo-Chinese delegation to the Paris Peace Conference, actually approaches Woodrow Wilson, says, we love your idea of wanting self-determination. We don't want to be Indo-Chinese. We don't want to be French. We want to be Vietnamese. And Wilson basically says, yeah, but you're Asian. Remember, Wilson is still a product of his time. Wilson's going to treat Eastern Europeans different from Western Europeans and treat Asians different than both. And so for him, self-determination for the Austro-Hungarian Empire made sense. But for Asia, the breaking up of colonialism, that was something he literally could not see past. So why do I mention this? Why do I even want to talk about this? The other legacy of World War I is not only in starting the First World War, but it will be instrumental in starting the ball rolling towards decolonization, and it's going to start the Cold War. See the U.S. versus Russia, we'll talk about that in a second, as well as we're laying the groundwork. Okay, this is 1919. Well, 46 years later, 45 years later, we're going to get the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. The United States will become fully embroiled in the Vietnam War. The fact is, that groundwork is laid at Versailles. And I am really sorry. I have no idea. Let me see. This is... here's the map of Europe. Let's see. I literally thought it was in here. Maybe it was... Maybe I'm thinking, my beginning lecture. So just to, Okay. There's Ho Chi Minh. Okay, that's Ho Chi Minh in 1919 at Versailles. Okay, the fact is, we're setting the ball rolling then. Now let's drift back to that World War II thing. Well, let's look here. This is now the map of Europe after Versailles. Italy expands. We see the creation of Yugoslavia. We see the creation of an independent Hungary. We see the creation of Czechoslovakia, the creation of Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland. We see that parts of Germany are now subsumed into Poland. Okay? If you see, it's got Germany over... Where's my mouse pointer? right here. This is East Prussia, but historically they're connected here. Well, not anymore. This now goes to Poland, and that Danzig is going to become a League of Nations city. That's going to be what Hitler says he wants. It actually triggers the invasion of Poland in September 1, 1939. We're going to see various plebiscite areas, and we're going to see right here the Rhineland is going to be ordered occupied by the Allies for a bit, and then ordered demilitarized, where even though that is part of Germany, no German soldier is allowed to set foot. Why? Because they're too close to the border with France. And need to say Alsace and Lorraine, that goes straight back to pardon me. That goes straight back to France. They're going to fix the issues of 1870. What about Kaiser Wilhelm II? Who's now, this is him in the 1930s, early 1940s. He'll die in 1941 in exile. But Kaiser Wilhelm, okay, well, there's going to be some people saying, look, we want to try him as a war criminal. Okay, if Article 231 says that, yes, Germany starts the war, we can then try Wilhelm for war crimes. And that's what Article 227, basically, this is the first major time the world is going to start looking towards the prosecution of war criminals. Now, Holland refuses to extradite. There's no way that they're going to give up Wilhelm. The fact is, most nations don't want to prosecute it. The U.S. says, guys, don't do this. This is stupid. And so nothing really comes of it. But we do get the Leipzig war crimes trials of 1921. And in these trials, a grand total of 12 Germans will be prosecuted for war crimes. Most will be found not guilty. Many won't actually go to trial. Some will see prison terms. The one that I'm thinking of is the case of, the German U-boat SM U-86, which torpedoes and sinks a hospital ship and then runs down the lifeboats and machine guns most of the survivors. Okay, well, the hospital ship was bad enough, then they tried to cover their tracks. So that's, just even more terrible. But what we're seeing, is it effective? No. Do most people consider this a failure? Absolutely. But we're also laying the groundwork for something in World War II. We're laying the groundwork for the Nuremberg trials because there's already a thought that, yes, now when one side wins a war, now things committed in the name of wartime are just following orders. That's going to be seriously questioned. So even though this fails, we're going to see that in the future it will be relatively successful. So let's look at the peace. Okay, what does this mean for Germany? Well, as I said, the Rhineland is going to be occupied. The German Luftstreitkräfte, the air service, will be entirely disbanded, and Germany will be prevented from having an air force. We're going to see that the German Navy, many of its newest and best dreadnoughts and battle cruisers, were to be surrendered to the British and the French as war prizes. The Germans were going to keep a smaller, decent navy. And then, on June the 21st, 1919, days before Versailles is going to be signed, the German Navy destroys itself at Scapa Flow. Remember how the ships were interned? The crews scuttle them. It was basically a giant symbolic FU. And so things like this, the dreadnought Baden will be sunk. Here's the salvage of the German Von der Tann, the first German battle cruiser. And it's actually interesting that the British publicly ticked off. This was something that Germans should not have done, but privately they loved it. Because privately, it meant that Germany would have to have a much smaller navy, and it also means they didn't have to worry about giving France ships or Italy ships or Japan ships, or worrying that, well, hey, if we give too many to this nation and not enough to that nation, will this trigger another war? The fact is that whole war to end all wars thing, people are forgetting that. People instead are starting to choose up sides for the next one, and there's a real conscious fear that this could easily escalate way beyond control. Now, another fun fact about these ships is they're going to have a valuable medical purpose. This and all other shipwrecks that date before June of 1945. Some medical instruments can only be made from steel or metal that's not been exposed to radiation. Well, what do I mean by that? I mean that anything that exists in a world, and I'm not sure exactly the time, this is just an article I read a while back, but anything that exists in a world where nuclear or atomic bombs have been detonated in the Earth's atmosphere, that stuff spread all over the planet. Okay? So anything on the surface of the planet's been somewhat contaminated. Hate to break it to you. And so for these instruments, it's not going to work. You need a source of non-irradiated metal never touched by atomic warfare. Where do you get that? You get that from shipwrecks. Okay? You get that from shipwrecks that predate 1945. And so some of these ships are still in Scapa Flow. Many were scrapped. There's other shipwrecks. And so those that are not protected, okay, as war graves, sometimes the steel, well, many times it's literally stolen by scavengers, but sometimes people actually use these to try to make, instruments like that. Just kind of cool. So after the German Navy is scuttled, okay, what they do is they say, okay, Germany, you have to surrender all of your battleships. All of your dreadnoughts, all of your battle cruisers. Germany is left only with a coastal force of pre-dreadnought battleships. To say that again another way, they're basically left from things that could have fought at the Battle of Tsushima, if you remember way back in this course. Okay, they're left with stuff, naval technology now obsolescent 13 years. And again, Germany, there's nothing it can do. I mean, there's no way it can say, no, we're not going to do this. The German army, once the largest standing army in Europe, is limited to 100,000 men. No more than 10 divisions. No general staff. No tanks, no submarines, no aircraft, no heavy artillery, no machine guns. Literally, Germany is gutted. So what effect is this gonna have on the German psyche? Remember, Germany coalesces around Prussia back in 1870. That's why I wanted you to know about Bismarck's War for Empire. And the joke about Prussia had been that Prussia is not a state with an army, but an army with a state. Now what's happened is that state no longer has an army. The grenadiers of, Friedrich the Grosse, Frederick the Great, they're gone. The famed, Prussian army that bested Napoleon at Waterloo, helping the Duke of Wellington, is gone. Okay, the famed German army of the Austro-Prussian, Franco-Prussian War, it's gone. Okay, remember one of the causes of World War I was the whole, we want our place in the sun, let's build a navy, Weltpolitik. Well, that's gone. Who had the greatest innovation in aircraft? The Germans. That's gone. And so the Germans are incensed, as well as incredibly harsh reparations that, had they been paid on time, had there not been a second war, would have taken till the 1980s to pay off. The fact is, this was going to bankrupt Germany, and the Allies knew it. But the Allies don't care. The fact is, at the time, they realized what was happening. Unlimited indemnity, just this massive stuff on Germany. If Germany cannot rebuild itself, again, and I can't stress this enough, remember, Germany is under the throes of revolution. Germany is, citizens are starving. It's now been deprived of its governmental system for centuries. Okay, lots of stuff is going to change. If Germany's now having to pay this indemnity, how does the economy get started? If the economy doesn't get started, how do people have work? If people don't have work, how do you prevent a power vacuum? Okay, and like this comment says, perhaps it would G up better if we let it touch Earth. They knew on July 28, 1919, when they signed this treaty, they knew what it was going to do. And few people cared. This man cared. Ferdinand Foch, Supreme Commander, all Allied forces on the Western Front. Foch, on reading the terms of the treaty, said, "My God, this is not peace. This is an armistice for but 20 years. He was wrong by 1 month and 3 days. 20 years, 1 month, and 3 days after July 28, 1919, Nazi Germany will cross the border and invade Poland, triggering the Second World War. They knew this was going to bring on another war. They knew what would happen, but they could not see beyond their own noses. They simply wanted to punish Germany. They wanted to try to ascribe some sort of meaning to the casualties, and in doing so, all they did was make it where at the beginning of this course, we call it World War I and not the Great War in modern European culture. And I would have to add the deadliest war in human history to that time. Because now we're going to do it even worse. Now it's interesting, one of the provisions of that treaty was the League of Nations. And even that, right out the bat, we're going to screw up. The United States simply says, no, we're not going to join. It's our idea. This is literally like your friend who says, hey, come out to the party, it'll be great, you get dressed, you go. And then they text and say, nah, I'm good, I'm staying home. The fact is, we are terrified. Is this going to infringe with our national sovereignty? Will the League trump the Constitution? That's what we're worried about. So it's interesting. November 19, 1919, the United States actually rejects the Treaty of Versailles. We say, no, we're not signing this. We are in a technical state of war with Germany until 1921. It takes till 1923 for American troops to actually leave Germany. Okay, the famed American song, Over There. Okay, the refrain went, we won't come back till it's over there. American troops are staying so long that the soldiers changed the refrain, we won't come back, we'll be buried over there. Because they literally thought, are we just going to stay here till hell freezes over? Speaking of American troops, really great story, and I don't know why I haven't told it yet, so I'm going to tell it now. John J. Pershing he's got to be one of my favorite characters in history. And the reason is, not because he's a good commander. The dude was paranoid about STDs. Absolutely paranoid. He literally made it Army policy. If you got an STD in France, so you're an American doughboy, you're overseas, and you sleep with a French woman or a Belgian woman or, somebody's woman, I guess, and you get an STD, you had to pay your own way home. The Army did all sorts of crazy stuff trying to figure out cures for STDs. Most of it didn't work. My personal favorites, and I'm going to say this so that every person listening to this video cramps, because I had to read this book for graduate school, and I'm going to inflict it upon you. 1919 treatments for venereal disease, it was called, what we know as STDs or STIs, included taking a needle full of mercury and inserting it into a man's penis and squirting it up there. And that would somehow kill whatever's up there. I don't know if it works, but I'm sure as hell not going to find out. But ow, that's all I've got to say. Other side, what if we cauterize that area? Not even making this up. Pershing had, pardon the play on words, but he's got a fetish for STDs. And that sounded really horrible and much better in my head. But the fact is, there are actually American troops that have to stay well past 1923 because after Britain brings its home, France brings its home, the United States, we're literally like, sorry guys, you got an STD. Uncle Sam is not going to bankroll your improprieties. Remember, this is a very prudish society, so you can't be open with sex. So what are some effects, of the end of the war? Other than, my impromptu abstinence-only lecture. Well, throughout the world, we're going to see the first we're going to see the Red Scare, especially here in the United States. But we can see that, this is going to be playing in with the Cold War, which doesn't begin until 1945. But some of the problems we're going to be talking about, especially from an American history perspective, which, remember, is how I'm trained. Okay? Well, think about it. We're feeding all of Europe. We've got factory workers that were told this war was going to go on until 1924. November 11, 1918, Eddystone shuts down. We don't need more Model 17 rifles. Rock Island Arsenal shuts down. We don't need French 75s. Farmers, you can stop growing wheat. Belgium's going to be able to feed itself next year. And there was fear. Okay, and I'll let these cartoons speak for themselves. Fear that, well, what if labor got pissy? Okay, what if they got agitated? Shouldn't say pissy. What if labor... Sorry, I'm taking cold meds right now, so filters are apparently gone. So sorry if I offended anybody there. But we're going to see, labor. Okay, what if they get angry about being laid off or not producing as much? Not to mention, and I think they were doing this in Europe as well, at least Britain and France. Okay, they don't want strikes. You can't sabotage the war effort. Pay people whatever they want. Do whatever you've got to prevent strikes. Well, you don't have to do that now. So that means wages can start to go down. And as wages go down, okay, people want to strike. And so there's this thought, looking back to the Russian Revolution, well, if you've got strikes and walkouts, then you're going to get disorder. And that's going to lead to riots. Bolshevism is going to come in. You're going to get murder. And then, boom, we're going to be just like Russia. As Russian emigres were going to Britain, going to France, going to the United States, there were actually people, then as today, attacking immigrants. Okay, compare this in your minds to what's going on with Syrian immigration today. Okay, this whole idea that if immigrants come into the supposed melting pot, well, if they're coming from Russia, they're just going to bring Bolshevism, they're going to bring extremism, they're going to blow everything up. No, they're escaping the commies. Okay, the same way as the Syrians or whoever are escaping the terrorists. They're not bringing it over here. They're trying to get the heck away from it. It's the same thing. And then as today, the United States is particularly xenophobic. We always have been. It is part of our national makeup. Okay, never mind a melting pot. We can go the Know-Nothing Party, the American Party of the 1850s. Americans typically do not like immigration. It's sad. It's terrible. It should change, but it's how it is. You're going to get crazy songs like this. We'll never change the blue and white to red, even though there's red on the flag, but whatever. But the fact is, part of that fear behind what are we getting out of the First World War? What did so many people die for? What was it all for? The influenza epidemic, and then a treaty that people knew was at some point going to cause another war. This made them afraid. What about how this is the war to end all wars? There can be no other war. Humanity must have learned. This has been so terrible. Flamethrowers, gas, chemical warfare, U-boats, aircraft, zeppelins, bombing cities. But we just keep going. There keeps being more wars. Red Army troops here in the Civil War. Or Alexander Kolchak, the commander of the White Russians to 1920. Imagine, if you will, you're an American soldier or even a British soldier, and you're on a troop ship. You're headed for France. It's November 11. You hear the war's over. Ship changes direction. You're like, hell yeah, I'm going home. And then you stay on the ship for a few weeks, and then they drop you off at either Arkhangelsk or in Vladivostok. And suddenly you're now going to fight Russia. One of the other, this ties in with the Cold War, is for the Allies, the end of the war does not mean the end of fighting. They want to fight the Reds. They want to prop up the white government. They want to try to end Bolshevism. And so from 1919 to 1921, okay, we're going to send Allied forces all over. We're going to send the American Expeditionary Force, some units to both Arkhangelsk and Siberia. And it's going to fail. Spoiler alert, there will be a Soviet Union from 1922 to 1991, So why is this so important? Okay, here are American troops at Arkhangelsk. Here are Japanese troops in Vladivostok. Well, here's why it's important. Height of the Cold War in the 1980s. Ronald Reagan did a televised address, and he was basically asking Premier Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, why do we have to have a Cold War? Why do we have to mutually distrust each other? Our two people have never fought. This is not something we've done. Why do we distrust each other? And he specifically said in his thing, our two people have never fought. Well, Gorbachev then shot back. Basically, took the bait. and said, Mr. President, the American people might not remember, but the Soviet people remember when you came to our country. The fact is, we're going to screw up American-Soviet relations from the very outset. Why do you think, okay, especially whether you've taken my Cold War course or you're going to take it soon, why do you think the Soviets are maybe a little paranoid that the United States wants to destroy them? And they believe that. Believe it or not, at no point in the Cold War does either side actively plan for a first strike. Neither side actually wants to blow away the other. But we say, well, the commies, let's go back to our propaganda. Let's look at the murder of the Tsar. Let's go back to our thing that labor is going to, blow up the planet. Okay? But from the Soviet perspective, they have to look to the founding story of their country when American troops came and fought them. Fought Soviets for the possession of Russia. So, who has the nuclear monopoly? For a time, we do. And so, yeah, they're going to wonder at some point, just as we did in 1919, are we going to decide that, you know what, the Soviet Union does not have a right to exist? We're laying that fear well before anybody has conceptually thought of how exactly to split, let alone fuse, an atom. But that is another enduring legacy of the First World War. Another one is the Balfour Declaration. And this was a letter from the British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Lord Walter Rothschild. And, here's Balfour, here's actually his declaration. And what he basically says, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionism, Zionist aspirations, which have been submitted to and approved by the cabinet. His Majesty's government. Wow, I cannot really read this. Basically, this is from late 1917, now in 1918, advocating the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine. This creates Palestine in 1918. The Treaty of Sèvres, which actually ends the war with the Ottomans, this is basically calling, at some point, let's create an Israel. And, of course, that's not going to actually happen till 1948. We talk about that in my Cold War class. But we're laying the groundwork here. And that's what World War I really does, is it so shakes things up that it doesn't cause the most deaths, but it sets the conditions for it. It doesn't cause the issues in the Middle East we have today, but it sets up the conditions for it. It doesn't cause the fact that, at least a few of you in this class are old enough, you probably, know who Bert the Turtle is, and not from one of my courses. World War I doesn't make you need to duck and cover, but it sets the conditions where that's eventually going to be a thing. And so, just as we've just set up the Cold War, now we're going to be setting up the Arab-Israeli conflicts in the Middle East. And again, World War I influences the world around you to this day in 2017, a century later, in ways that you probably haven't even fathomed. Just a couple of things, I'll talk about it more when I really talk about the legacy of the Great War, but just things that, come to mind. Do you think what I just said is really crazy? Would you say it's, maybe over the top? Or, hey, it's winter, well, it's fall. It's Oklahoma, it doesn't know what season it is, but it's getting colder. My wife loves to break out her trench coats. Well, coats for the trenches. In fact, she loves leather trench coats. Where do you get the leather? Well, open cockpits and fighter planes. How else are you going to keep a fighter pilot warm? That's when leather coats become a common thing. Again, World War I, just subtly in many cases, in other cases, it's about subtle as smacking somebody over the head with a brick, but it influences the world around you. We're going to see various wars of independence. Okay, and this is how we're going to get Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland. And this is not going to be easy. Okay, as the Russian Empire crumbles, and as the Bolsheviks are struggling to centralize power and fight off the Reds as well, or fight off the Whites, as well as try to coalesce an effective government, they can't really deal with this stuff. So in these relatively small wars, we see the creation of just a whole host of new nations. And so this is going to, help to, establish those post-World War I borders. But why that's an issue? Well, let's do this. Finland. Well, Finland's a little too close to Petrograd, which in 1939 is going to be known as Leningrad. So the then Soviets are going to want to invade Finland, and you get the Winter War. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. Well, they're going to come under the Soviet domination as a result of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939. And of course, Poland becoming independent, that is the main catalyst for, the outbreak of the Second World War. All of that kind of coalescing right here. In particular, I just wanted to single out one of these wars, so let's just talk about the war for Finland. And because, I think Finland's fascinating, but it's also, probably the most has been written about it just because Finland is, of these nations, is the one that actually retains its independence the longest. And so what we're going to see is the Finns fight hard for their independence. These are children, drafted in to fight for independence, but then after independence, we're going to see a civil war. Because the same issue of Bolshevism it's spreading throughout Europe, means that even when this nation kind of splits off, okay, now it's going to decide, is it going to be, free? Is it going to be a republic? Is it going to be a monarchy, dictatorship, Bolshevik? What is it? So we see that Finland had been incorporated into Russia since the latter parts of the 19th century. And in 1906, there had been some liberalization. Okay, rather than that strict divided class system of Russia, in fact, in Finland, you could actually enjoy universal suffrage. I should check on that. I would assume that means universal male suffrage, but I could be wrong. Well, the February Revolution, just destroys the fact that Finland had economically done well for itself. And so we see that Finland says, okay, you know what? We can't do this. They wait till the October Revolution. They wait till the Bolsheviks, again, are seized with trying to centralize control. And so they, say, nope, we're done, and declare independence. And in the resulting civil war, it's going to be particularly brutal. But eventually, the whites are going to win out only because they have to have German support. Okay, the Germans don't really care about the Finns, but the Germans don't want Bolshevism creeping, next door. And what I love about this picture, these are Red soldiers. That guy just looks hilarious in the top left. But what's interesting, I think, is some of the weapons of the Finnish Civil War. What do I mean by that? Well, one of the most oddball rifles that the Finns had to use was the Japanese Type 38 Arisaka. The Japanese Type 30 Arisaka, excuse me. Now, I should wait, Japan is here, and Finland is here. I know, I'm terrible at maps, too, and math, that's similar. In the Russo-Japanese War, the Russians captured a lot of Japanese Arisakas, and they didn't want to keep them close to the Pacific, so they're like, well, let's keep these in case we ever need them. They sent them then to Finland, as far away from Japan as you could get. So when the war breaks out, they use them, and that's why if you look in this picture, these guys are not equipped with Mosin Nagants, but these Reds are equipped with Japanese Arisakas captured in the Russo-Japanese War. These white child soldiers, however, are equipped with Russian-made Mosins. And so, literally, this whole concept of civil war is just going to break out. There's going to be things like the Russo-Polish War. The fact is, various wars up till about 1925, as these new nation states try to, figure out, okay, what are our boundaries? What are our limits? What is our place in the world? These are not gentle births. Think of the one I mentioned the other day. So, Armenian, Azerbaijan. And in most cases, as with Azerbaijan, there is a component of Bolshevik revolution. Because the Soviets are exporting this stuff. People like the idea. Communism, terrible in practice, terrible idea though it may be, people find it attractive. As best I can, Okay, you guys know, I don't know if I've been politically active in this course or not. I drift a little right of center. Well, my best friend and I roomed together in college, and he was an avowed communist, and he joined the Youth Communist Party, and so you can imagine our political discussions were fun. And then, he after a semester he moved away, went to Arizona State, but then he came back a couple of years later. He came up to me and he said, "Justin, I got something to tell you." I said, "Okay, well, what?" He said, "Well, I resigned from the Communist Party." "Okay, why?" And he said, "Well, I just found them to be too corrupt." And all I could say was, "Where the hell have you been the last 50 years? Of course, this was, like 20 years ago, but still, where have you been the last 50 years? Of course, communism's corrupt. This is America. We don't like commies." Now watch, there's probably a red click, in the class. No Russian heart attacks, please. I don't want to die through an ice pick through the head. So to try to combat all of these little wars, these brush fires, if you will, that are popping up, let's look back at that League of Nations. Let's look at Wilson's idealized way. How can we keep the peace? And this is one of the dumbest things ever. Why do I say it's dumb? The best way I can explain the League of Nations is watch Team America World Police. Watch Matt Damon. But especially the part where Hans Blix basically says to Kim Jong-un, "Let me inspect your stuff, or else." Or else what? "Or else I'll write you a letter telling you how very angry I am." Okay, and if that's meant to mock the United Nations, that's very good at describing the League of Nations. The fact is, it's got these high-minded ideals. Let's prevent a war. Let's bring everybody in. Let's have a discussion. Except there's no military authority. There's no legal authority. It could not compel its members to do anything. Literally, even 1935, when Italy invades Ethiopia in the Second Italian Abyssinian War, all the League of Nations can do is say, "Guys, I really think you shouldn't trade with Italy. Italy did a very bad thing and you shouldn't trade with it." That's not going to stop anybody. All right? So, there's that. Then there's the fact we refuse to join, which, as one cartoonist summed up, we're the frickin' keystone. Without us, this don't work. Now, why do we not join? Well, remember, we're afraid. Are we going to lose our national authority? Are we going to lose our national sovereignty? Remember, people still think that George Washington had it right. Avoid entangling foreign alliances. The fact is, the United States does not wed itself, not wet itself, wed itself to European involvement in alliances until the until the Marshall Plan of 1946-47. It takes till after the Second World War before we become entangled in a foreign alliance. But what about the two hotspots? What about Germany that nobody seems to like? What about the Soviet Union that nobody seems to like? They're barred from joining. So, to explain this plan where it will sound brilliant to all of you, I want an organization where all of us are going to meet so that all of us can resolve our troubles so that nobody ever goes to war again. But the two troublemakers that this is actually geared towards, they're not allowed to come play. It makes no sense. Somebody should have gone, "What the hell, Wilson? What were you thinking?" But nobody does. People put their hopes in this, and it's going to fail. It can do nothing but. And already we're going to see if that's 1919. We don't have to wait long to see where the trouble spots are going to be. Okay, we can look at Italy, which, remember, Italy suffers from the fact that they didn't want to go to war. There's on the brink of social revolution, the stratified class society. The lower classes hate the dumb officers who got 675,000 of their guys killed. And so, despite the fact that Italy is on the winning side, World War I is an absolute disaster for it. Think about it. It gets some of Austria. It loses hundreds of thousands of people. There's a growing issue with class problems. We get the rise of socialist parties. People are flirting with communism on one spectrum, and you've got this weird fat dude that, wants to make a new Roman Empire. We'll talk about him. Benito Mussolini, once Bersaglieri, a member of the light infantry, but now becomes hardcore socialist, then fascist. Not to mention, Italy monetarily is much more poor compared to the other Allied powers. It may not suffer the territorial devastation of the other allies, but it sure as heck does not reap the benefits that everyone else got. And so what that means is Italy is going to, they're going to experiment with some new governmental systems. They're going to try to find a way out of their problems, and they're not going to feel like they need to work with the other allies. Spoiler alert, Italy becomes the first fascist nation. Italy starts the ball rolling for the Second World War. Because Hitler's going to watch what Mussolini does and say, well, the League did nothing, so that means I can do it. Italy should have been, on the Allied side. Italy should have been one of the good guys throughout all of World War II, not just from 1943 on. But Italy suffers so badly in World War I that even though, it's a Pyrrhic victory, even though it wins, it may as well have lost. The League's not going to touch that. Here's the Austro-Hungarian dreadnought Szent István, which was torpedoed on June 10, 1918. And why I wanted to mention that is with this Szent István, as well as her sister ship Vibris Unitas, which is sunk in November 1918, Austria-Hungary ceases to be a world power. What we're going to see is, if we look, we've talked about the power vacuum in Germany. We've talked about the collapse of the German Kaiserreich. Well, let's talk about the dual monarchy. Karl I, calls on October 16 for the formation of national assemblies. They had been begging the United States for an armistice in the latter half of 1918. Well, the 14 points prescribed self-determination. Prescribed, you've got to give stuff to the various ethnic people in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So Karl thinks, okay, if we have national assemblies, if we federalize Austria, make it a federal system instead of an empire, maybe that'll placate the United States. Then the United States Secretary of State, Robert Lansing, 2 days later, said, no, autonomy is not good enough. You must give everybody independence. There must be a separate Germanic Austria, a separate Magyar Hungary, a separate Czechoslovakia, a separate Poland, a separate Slavic region. And so Karl does what he can, but he's going to be exiled in March 1919, officially deposed in April. He'll die in 1922 of pneumonia. The guy is only 34, so he's pretty young. Okay, he was no Franz Josef, but why I want to mention this is there's going to be various revolutions. There's going to be the issue of communists, and so coming out of the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, which September 10, 1919 officially dissolves Austria-Hungary, what we're going to see is that Hungary is going to be a fairly sizable nation. Hungary is going to have a working monarchy under Admiral Horthy, who was the last major commander of the Austro-Hungarian Navy. But Horthy's regime is going to be toppled in the wake of the Second World War. We're going to create Czechoslovakia. We're going to create a state of Slovenia, Croats and Serbs. Later, that'll merge with Serbia. We'll call it Yugoslavia. But what we're going to see is Austria, which, had commanded all this in a fairly massive empire. Austria is now going to be a small, poor, landlocked, destitute country, ripe for and it'll see civil war. It'll be ripe for the taking when, the Nazis march in and oust Julie Andrews from, The Hills Are Alive. Austria, which had been this major power leading the world to war, is just completely gutted. Consider this, Austria-Hungary once had a major navy built to challenge the Italian Navy. Guess what? They're landlocked now. There is neither an Austrian nor a Hungarian navy because neither power has access to the Adriatic anymore. Okay, that now belongs to Italy and Yugoslavia. We're going to see that Germany has one heck of a power vacuum. We're going to see these guys, the Freikorps, or the Free Fighters, which basically these are paramilitary veterans who come home, say, we're not going to have Bolshevism in my country. The army is limited to 100,000. Fine. We'll wear our Stahlhelms, we'll wear our uniforms, we'll have our Gewehr 98s, but we're going to do our own thing. And they basically extra-legally roam around the countryside, shooting communists, shooting Bolsheviks, trying to restore order. Remember that German Revolution? Through August 1919, there are large-scale rebellions. They literally don't have a working, cohesive government. The communists are very popular. They're very powerful. But they can't work with any of the German political parties. The SPD, the Social Democrats, are probably the closest ideologically to them, but the SPD is not about to ally itself with Bolshevism. And even as we go into the early 1920s, as you have working effective governments, there will be continued coups. Okay? It's simply Germany is a place of turmoil in the 1920s. And it's this turmoil, this revolution, the fact that there's such widespread Bolshevism and discontent. This fuels Ludendorff's concept of stab in the back. This fuels the idea that maybe, just maybe, somebody here at home is to blame for us losing the war. That the German military didn't lose it on the home front or on the front, but it was lost back here. And so one of the issues that Hitler, taking this, especially after he begins, joining the National Socialist Deutsche Arbeitspartei, or the NSDAP, the German Social Workers' Party, better known Nationalsozialist, the Nazi Party, in 1920, he'll come up with the idea of Judeo-Bolshevism. Already they're focusing on the Bolsheviks, link Jews with that, link that age-old European anti-Semitism. And again, World War I, by 1920, 1 year after the Peace of Versailles, we're already setting in motion a chain of events that not only lead to the Second World War, but lead to a Holocaust. These Freikorps, these free military units, this is what crushes those big revolutions. Veterans love to join these things. It was work, it was stuff they knew how to do, and many of these German veterans ideologically are conservative, so they would have been anti-Bolshevik. As an example, though, of some of the coups, Hitler, head of the NSDAP, on November 8 to 9, 1923, he and his fellow people, they're going to stage the Beer Hall Putsch, which was an attempt to seize power. November 9, they're going on the anniversary, of the German Revolution. They're playing into that. And if you look, most of them are veterans, including Hitler. But right here, this guy just on Hitler's right, that's Erich Ludendorff. That's the guy that creates the stab in the back mentality. That's the guy that, has the mental breakdown. He is instrumental in getting Hitler to power. Now, this coup attempt fails. Hitler and many of his conspirators are arrested. Hitler himself will be jailed to Landsberg prison, where Hitler, with nothing better to do, writes the creepiest book in human history, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. In Mein Kampf, he relates how he was convalescing after being wounded in action when he hears of the German defeat in the First World War and how he just sobbed. He relates the stab in the back and how, again, the Judeo-Bolshevists, they're the ones that deprived Germany of its victory. He then begins talking that Germany must expand, it must rearm, it must take its place again in the sun. He talks about the concept of Lebensraum, this idea of living space in the East, of depopulating. And that's what he says, depopulate the spaces in this new Poland. If that's not going to be Germany anymore, remove the population so that Germany can expand. If you want to know why the Nazis do what they do in World War II, you need only look at Mein Kampf, which was written after the failed coup, after this guy seizes control of a new party, after World War One. Again, World War I, you can draw a straight line. And if you ever think human beings are stupid, this is my proof to you. This is an article in a paper from the New York Times. Okay, Hitler, tamed by prison. Hitler, once the demigod of the reactionary extremists, was released on parole from imprisonment. His behavior during imprisonment convinced the authorities that, like his political organization, it was no longer to be feared. It is believed he will retire to private life and return to Austria, the country of his birth. Oopsies! Probably the most misleading, factually incorrect headline in human history. So if we then look at the Europe of post-World War I, it looks an awful lot like the Europe we have today. But you've got many new countries, all fighting, trying to figure out their place. How do they all work together? Where does one begin? Where does one end? You have to now deal with the fact that many of these vast empires, such as Austria or Hungary, don't exist anymore. We have to deal with the fact that Italy is now having basically a crisis in social welfare. But you also have to deal with the fact that Germany has the issue of unemployment. What do you do with all those veterans? Massive war reparations, national humiliation, and it went in 5 years from being a world power to now a nation perpetually on the brink of civil war and revolution. No effective government, no strong leader. And the conditions are ripe for a madman to come in, take the reins of power, and trigger a massive Second World War. So what my plan is for the rest of the course is I think our next lecture, I'm going to focus more on views of the war, how it impacted people, the poetry, the songs, the literature, the art, stuff like that. Then I'll probably, I might just do 2 lectures. I might break it up into 3. We'll see. But then what I want to do is basically, how do people see the war? What is the great... Okay, 3 lectures actually. Look at how people at the time saw the war. Then I want to do how we see the war today. And then just basically a brief... So what happens now? I've just set up this, 1919, it's chaos and turmoil, the rise of Hitler, social revolution, all this stuff. Well, let's see how the First World War is going to affect the beginning of the Second. On that note, as we're drawing down to the final 3 lectures, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed the course. Please make sure you do the course evals, which you'll be seeing on D2L. And please, stay in touch. If I can write you a letter of recommendation, please let me know. Stay in touch. I'd love to know how you guys are doing. Add me to Facebook. I love keeping in touch with students. I really hope you've enjoyed the course. We're almost there. We're not quite there yet, but we're, in the final stretch. And as always, if there's anything I can possibly do, please don't hesitate to ask. Alright guys, I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.